The sun hung low over the quiet village, painting the dusty roads in shades of amber and gold. Eli walked alone, his thin frame weaving carefully between the houses, careful not to disturb the few villagers still tending to their evening chores. He was small for his age, with dark, thoughtful eyes that seemed to notice everything yet reveal nothing. Around him, the village hummed with the comfort of familiarity, but Eli always felt like an outsider, like a shadow moving through someone else's world. He tried to speak to other children his age, but words seemed to escape him when he needed them most. Laughter from the playing children on the village square felt distant, echoing through a wall he couldn't climb. The world around him was alive and warm, yet he remained invisible, a quiet observer of life rather than a participant. Eli often sought refuge in the forest at the edge of the village, where the air was cooler and filled with the scent of damp earth and wildflowers. Here, he could wander as long as he wished without explanation. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying secrets that only he seemed to understand. He crouched by the stream, watching the sunlight dance across the rippling water, marveling at the tiny fish darting beneath the surface. In these moments, he felt a fragile sort of peace. One afternoon, as Eli traced the edge of the riverbank, something unusual caught his eye. A smooth, dark stone lay half buried in the mud. It was ordinary in size, but as he picked it up, a strange warmth spread through his fingers, as though the stone had a pulse of its own. He held it close, feeling a quiet thrum in his chest, a strange resonance that made the air around him feel lighter, almost vibrating. Eli's heart raced with wonder and apprehension. He had never felt anything like it before. The stone seemed aware. He looked around, half expecting someone to be watching him, but the forest remained silent. Carefully, almost reverently, he dug a small hole beneath an old oak tree, tucking the stone into the soil. It seemed to sink into the earth like it belonged there, and for a moment, the ground seemed to shimmer, catching the sunlight in a way that made it appear alive. From that day, Eli returned to the oak as often as he could, peering into the soil with anxious anticipation. Strange things began to happen. The wind shifted, carrying soft whispers that tickled his ears, almost like a language he couldn't understand. Shadows flitted across the edges of his vision, shapes moving where nothing should exist. Leaves around the planting spot glimmered faintly, catching the sun in iridescent flashes, though no one else seemed to notice. Eli spoke to the stone, unsure if it could hear him or if his words were just carried off by the wind. "Grow, become something beautiful," he whispered one evening, kneeling in the cool dirt. "I want to see you alive." The air seemed still, listening, and for the first time, he felt a connection not just to the earth beneath him, but to something far greater, something he could not yet understand. Days passed, then weeks. Eli's anticipation grew into obsession. He found himself talking to the soil as though it could respond, sharing his thoughts, his fears, his secret dreams. Other children noticed his absence from their games, and villagers began to murmur about the boy who spent too much time in the forest. Eli didn't mind. The forest was his sanctuary, and the stone his silent companion. Then, one morning the world shifted. Eli arrived at the oak and knelt beside the spot where he had buried the stone. The soil trembled slightly beneath his fingers. And then, a small green sprout pushed through the earth, delicate but vibrant, unlike anything Eli had seen. Its stem was slender and luminous, as if infused with the forest's own heartbeat. As he leaned closer, he thought he saw tiny, almost imperceptible shapes flicker on its surface, like eyes or faces, watching him, observing him. Eli's breath caught in his throat. He had never seen a sprout so alive, so aware. It trembled slightly in the wind, though the air was still. The leaves shimmered with colors that didn't belong to any ordinary tree, glimmering as though they carried hidden light. For a long moment, the boy could only stare, feeling a strange mix of awe and fear. He reached out to touch it, and the sprout seemed to lean toward him, a silent acknowledgement, a promise of something beyond his understanding. The forest around him seemed to hold its breath. Birds hushed their songs. The whispers in the wind paused, and the shadows froze in their dance. The tree was awake, and with it, Eli felt something stirred deep inside him. Curiosity, hope, and a flicker of destiny he could not yet name. As he rose to leave, the sprout swayed gently, like it had taken its first small step into the world. Eli's heart swelled with a sense of purpose, and though he didn't yet know the journey ahead, he knew his life, and perhaps the life of many others, was about to change forever. Eli returned to the oak every day, sometimes at dawn, sometimes as the sun dipped behind the hills, unable to tear himself away from the miracle unfolding before him. The small sprout he had planted with trembling hands had grown far faster than any ordinary plant. Within a few days, its stem stretched upward, strong and supple, twisting gracefully toward the sunlight. Its leaves shimmered faintly, like dew laced with silver, catching the light in ways that felt unreal. It was not just a tree. It was alive in a way that made Eli's heart pound. As he knelt beside it one morning, he noticed something that made his breath catch. The bark, smooth and dark, seemed to ripple, forming faint shapes that almost resembled faces. At first, he thought it was his imagination, but as he watched, the shapes shifted, tiny mouths opening and closing, eyes flickering as though breathing beneath the surface. Eli's pulse raced. "Can you see me?" he whispered, uncertain if he expected an answer. The tree shivered gently in response. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but Eli felt a strange, almost electric warmth spread through his chest. For the first time, he realized this was not just a plant. It was something sentient, something aware of his presence. Days turned into weeks. Eli's life became entwined with the tree. He spent hours observing its every movement, noticing that the faces displayed fleeting emotions. Some looked joyful, their expressions warm and welcoming, while others seemed sad, sorrow etched into their tiny features. He began to feel a sense of responsibility for these faces, as though they depended on him to thrive. But his obsession did not go unnoticed. Villagers began whispering, "Have you seen Eli? Always wandering in the woods, talking to himself." The rumors spread quickly. Some claimed he was cursed. Others feared he was summoning spirits. Eli ignored them, retreating further into the forest, comforted only by the company of the tree. Its faces seemed to respond when he spoke or sang, tilting gently as though listening, smiling faintly when he laughed, frowning in sympathy when he sighed. One afternoon, as he hummed softly while brushing his fingers across the smooth bark, a sudden movement startled him. One of the faces began to cry. Tiny streams of silver seemed to trickle down its bark-like cheeks, and a deep, muffled sob echoed in Eli's mind. His heart clenched. The anguish was raw, almost unbearable. "Why are you crying?" he whispered, placing his hand on the trembling bark. A cold shiver ran up his arm, but he did not pull away. "Is there something I can do?" The sobs quieted slightly, as though acknowledging his presence, but they did not stop entirely. Eli realized that the tree was not merely reflecting emotions. These faces held memories, grief, and perhaps even the echoes of people who had lived long ago. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him, heavier than he had ever felt in his young life. Despite the growing tension in the village, Eli found solace in his secret. The tree became a mirror for his own loneliness. Its quiet, mysterious presence filled the spaces where human connection had failed him. When other children mocked him or ignored him, the tree listened without judgment, offering silent companionship. He began to talk to it as if it were his only true friend, sharing his fears, dreams, and small victories. But there were moments of fear, too. Shadows flitted near the tree, even when the forest was still, and at times, the whispers in the wind grew urgent, almost frantic, as though the tree itself was calling out to him. Eli could feel a faint tremor through the soil beneath his knees, a heartbeat in the earth that matched his own. Something told him that these faces were not just trapped spirits. They were waiting for something, and he might be the only one who could help them. The emotional bond deepened with each passing day. Eli began to notice patterns. The faces changed expression according to his mood. When he felt joy, their features softened, almost smiling. When sadness or fear took hold, their eyes darkened, their tiny mouths turning downward. He realized, with a thrill of fear and awe, that the tree's growth was somehow connected to him, tied to his emotions in a way he could neither fully understand nor control. One evening, as the sun bled orange across the horizon, Eli sat at the base of the tree, leaning against its shimmering bark. The forest was quiet, save for the rustle of leaves and the faint gurgle of the river nearby. The faces stared at him now, unblinking and patient. One face, smaller and more delicate than the others, tilted toward him. Its eyes seemed to glimmer with recognition, and a silent message pressed against his mind. "Help us." Eli's throat tightened. He did not yet understand what help they needed, but he knew instinctively that their fates, and perhaps his own, were intertwined. The tree was no longer just a magical curiosity. It was a living, breathing part of him, demanding care, attention, and courage. As the stars began to emerge in the dusky sky, Eli rose to his feet, brushing dirt from his hands. He looked back at the small tree, its leaves catching the last light of day, faces flickering faintly like lanterns in the dark. A shiver of both excitement and fear ran down his spine. The journey had only just begun, and Eli understood, in the deepest part of his heart, that he was no longer alone. For the first time, he felt the weight and wonder of what he had planted, and the price of tending something so extraordinary. Eli had spent countless hours beside the tree, observing its subtle movements, listening to the whispers in the wind, and feeling the pulse of life within its bark. One rainy afternoon, as droplets fell softly from the darkened sky, something extraordinary happened. A face delicate and sorrowful shifted in the bark more clearly than ever before. Its eyes seemed to meet Eli's directly, and he felt a sudden, undeniable connection, as if it were trying to speak. "Can you hear me?" Eli whispered, leaning closer, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and hope. Then, as if drawn by his question, a voice echoed in his mind, soft, distant, yet filled with longing. "Yes, I can hear you." Eli froze, his heart pounding. He had never experienced anything like this. The voice was not spoken aloud, but it resonated in his mind with startling clarity. He felt the emotions behind it: pain, regret, sorrow, and an ache for release. He realized, with awe and fear, that the faces were not merely shapes on the tree. They were souls trapped in the bark, longing to be understood, longing for peace. Over the following days, Eli began to communicate more deliberately. Each face had a story, though fragmented, like pieces of an unfinished puzzle. Some whispered memories of lost loved ones, dreams never fulfilled, and moments of deep regret. Others murmured, longing for forgiveness or the relief of being remembered. Eli listened tirelessly, feeling the weight of their stories pressing on his young shoulders. One evening, as he traced the lines of a particularly worn face with his fingertips, it spoke more clearly than ever. "I am the one your grandmother loved. She left this village before I could say goodbye." Eli's chest tightened. He had never known his grandmother well. She had passed when he was very young. Yet this connection made his heart ache with a mixture of grief and wonder. The tree was revealing the hidden histories of his village, of people long gone but not forgotten, and he was the only one who could hear them. But as Eli became more involved with the tree, fear began to stir elsewhere. Villagers noticed his frequent absences and his growing obsession. Whispers spread quickly. "The boy is bewitched. He talks to the trees. Something unnatural has taken root in the forest." Some elders shook their heads, fearful of curses and spirits that could bring misfortune. Eli tried to ignore them, but their fear gnawed at him. He understood why they were scared. He would have been frightened, too, if he had seen a tree with faces that moved and spoke. Yet he could not abandon the souls that had entrusted him with their stories. Their pain and longing were real, and each day that passed, Eli felt more responsibility pressing upon him. Tensions escalated when one particularly skeptical villager, an elder named Omari, confronted Eli. Omari's eyes were sharp, his voice stern. "This tree, you've meddled with forces you do not understand," he said. "Children have gone missing before, and strange things happen in forests when men or boys like you interfere. If you do not leave it be, we may have to cut it down." Eli's chest tightened. The thought of the tree being destroyed, of the faces losing their only chance to speak and be remembered, filled him with terror. Yet he knew he could not show the villagers too much. He would be branded a fool or a sorcerer. He nodded quietly, but inside his mind raced. That night, as he returned to the tree, the whispers were louder than ever. The faces were restless, shifting and flickering under the dim moonlight. A chilling thought struck him. The stone he had planted, this mysterious gift, was ancient. Somehow, he had awakened something much larger than himself, tied to the land, to memories, and to souls that could not move on without being heard. The tree had a history. It was older than the village, older than the hills, a repository of grief, joy, and forgotten truths. Eli's actions had awakened a cycle that could not be easily undone, and he was at its center. He reached out to the tree, touching the bark that pulsed like a heartbeat. "I will help you. I will listen. I will remember," he vowed silently. But with that promise came a heavy moral dilemma. Could he protect the tree and the trapped souls if the villagers turned fully against him? Could he face their fear and anger while bearing the weight of so many unresolved lives? He realized that the cost of helping the tree might be more than he could bear. Yet the faces, some pleading, some sorrowful, some almost hopeful, looked at him with a silent trust he could not abandon. The following morning, Eli noticed that the tree had changed subtly. One of the faces, a small, delicate one, almost hidden among the leaves, smiled faintly. It was the first expression of gratitude he had witnessed. At the same time, another face turned away, eyes shut tight, as if burdened by secrets too heavy to share. Eli felt the duality of his task. Some souls were ready to be comforted. Others were still steeped in pain, and it was his responsibility to help them find balance. He spent long hours experimenting, speaking softly, singing, or simply sitting in silence, observing the nuances of each face. Slowly, patterns emerged. Certain emotions could calm them. Others could trigger distress. Eli began to understand that the tree was connected not only to the past, but also to the present. He could influence its moods, just as it influenced his own. And yet, the villagers' fear was growing. Omari returned, this time with others, their faces grim. "You must leave it alone," he warned, "or it will bring disaster upon us all." Eli stood his ground, his small frame shaking with fear, but also burning with determination. "I can't," he said firmly. "It's alive. It needs me, and I won't let it be destroyed." A tense silence followed, broken only by the rustling of the tree's shimmering leaves. Eli felt the weight of his choices pressing upon him, the duality of love and fear, responsibility and danger. He was learning that helping the tree meant more than tending to a sprout. It meant confronting fear, embracing empathy, and accepting the consequences of awakening something ancient and powerful. As night fell, Eli remained at the tree's base, surrounded by the murmurs and faint whispers of the faces. Each fragment of story, each flicker of expression, etched itself into his heart. He was no longer a lonely boy. He was a guardian, a bridge between the living and the remembered, between the world of the seen and the unseen. And he knew, deep in his bones, that the next steps he took would define not only his life, but the lives of those who had been waiting to be heard for generations. Days melted into weeks, and Eli's connection with the tree deepened in ways he could not have imagined. Each visit brought new discoveries, new emotions etched into the shifting faces that adorned the bark. Some faces laughed silently, tiny smiles flickering across their features, while others screamed without sound, their hollow eyes filled with anguish. Eli felt each of their emotions as if they were his own, a tidal wave of joy, sorrow, and longing crashing over him with every encounter. One afternoon, as golden light spilled across the forest floor, Eli noticed a face he had never seen before. Its eyes were wide, familiar, and intensely sorrowful. Something in the expression tugged at his memory, stirring a long-buried ache in his chest. As he drew closer, the features became clearer, sharper. He could recognize the shape of the eyes, the curve of the lips. "Grandmother," he whispered, barely audible, his voice trembling. The face seemed to nod, a faint, almost imperceptible gesture. Eli's heart tightened. The stories of the tree, of the faces trapped within it, were not just distant memories or unknown souls. They were connected to him, to his own family, to his past. He crouched by the tree, feeling a surge of emotion he had never experienced. He had never realized how deeply lonely he had been, how desperately he craved connection, until this face mirrored a piece of himself he thought lost forever. From that day onward, Eli's visits became more intentional. He spoke softly, asking the faces about their stories, their regrets, their joys. Some laughed, and the sound, though faint and ethereal, lifted his spirits. Others whispered secrets too heavy for human ears, tales of sorrow, betrayal, and longing. Eli listened without judgment, offering what comfort he could, often sitting for hours in quiet solidarity. But the villagers' fear was growing. Rumors spread like wildfire. "The boy is possessed," some whispered. "He spends all his time in the forest, talking to a cursed tree." Parents warned their children to stay away, and even a few friends from the village began to look at him with suspicion. Eli felt the sting of isolation deepen, yet the tree remained a constant, unwavering presence. Its faces seemed to understand him in ways no human ever could. One night, under the silver glow of the moon, Eli realized the tree responded not only to his actions, but to his emotions. When he felt joy, the faces smiled. When he felt fear, they winced and twisted in pain. A heavy truth settled over him. The tree's growth was tied to him, his moods, his very heart. It was fragile, dependent on his care and attention, yet alive with a force far older than he could comprehend. Driven by curiosity and a need to understand, Eli began experimenting. He hummed soft tunes, speaking words of encouragement and hope, observing the faces' subtle reactions. He noticed patterns. A gentle voice calmed the sorrowful. A kind smile coaxed joy from the hidden expressions. The tree was not just a collection of trapped souls. It was an emotional mirror, reflecting both the lives it carried and the heart of the boy tending it. But with this intimacy came pain. One face, small and delicate, wept uncontrollably, its tears glistening like silver drops on the bark. Its sorrow pressed against Eli's chest like a physical weight, and he sank to his knees beside it, whispering apologies and promises he barely understood. The anguish of that single face reminded him that not every soul could be soothed easily, and that some grief could not be erased. It could only be held, understood, and carried with care. Yet there were moments of wonder that balanced the sorrow. A face would grin, wide and bright, and the leaves above shimmered like morning dew, dancing with light. Others whispered forgotten jokes or playful memories, and Eli would laugh aloud, the sound mingling with the wind in a symphony of shared joy. He felt needed, seen, and alive in a way he had never experienced among the villagers. But his bond with the tree came with growing tension. One morning, Eli found a group of villagers standing at the forest's edge, watching him. Their eyes were full of fear and accusation. Omari, the stern elder, stepped forward, his voice shaking with authority. "You are meddling with forces you do not understand," he said. "This tree, it is cursed. Leave it alone, or it will bring ruin upon us all." Eli's chest tightened. The words stung, but he did not step back. He thought of the faces, of the stories he had heard, of the souls depending on him. "I can't," he said firmly. "They need me. I won't abandon them." The villagers muttered among themselves, fearful yet powerless to understand the depth of what they could not see. Eli turned back to the tree. Its leaves shimmered faintly in the morning light, faces flickering with emotion. Some smiled at him, others looked anxious, but all seemed to plead silently. "Do not give up." Eli sank to his knees, pressing his forehead to the rough bark. "I won't," he whispered, tears running down his cheeks. "I promise." He felt the tree shiver beneath him, as if acknowledging his vow. A sense of purpose filled him, a courage he had never known. He understood now that caring for the tree meant more than watching it grow. It meant facing fear, embracing empathy, and carrying the weight of countless lives, long forgotten yet alive in this one extraordinary place. That evening, as twilight painted the sky in shades of purple and gold, Eli sat beneath the tree, his back against the trunk. The faces shifted gently, some looking at him with gratitude, others with sorrow still unhealed. He realized the tree was teaching him something profound, that grief, joy, love, and loss were intertwined, and that understanding and empathy could bridge the gap between the living and the remembered. For the first time, Eli felt truly connected, not just to the tree, not just to the faces, but to the greater rhythm of life itself. And though fear and uncertainty still, the village was restless. Whispers traveled like wind through the streets, carried from one worried parent to another. Eli had grown used to the murmurs, the sideways glances, and the fearful speculation, but today something felt different. As he approached the forest, a sense of tension prickled at his skin, and the air felt heavy, as though warning him of an approaching storm. The tree, once radiant and vibrant, looked different. Its leaves drooped slightly, duller than before, and the faces etched into the bark flickered in irregular patterns, some twisting in silent anguish. Eli's heart pounded. He crouched beside it, running his fingers along the bark. "No, please stay strong," he whispered, but the trembling under his hands told him that something was terribly wrong. Hours passed. Eli stayed with the tree, offering whispered words of comfort, but he could not calm it. Shadows lengthened across the forest floor, and for the first time, Eli felt a genuine fear, not for himself, but for the lives trapped within the bark. One face, small and delicate, vanished suddenly, leaving an empty hollow where it had smiled only yesterday. Eli's stomach twisted with guilt. He had failed. He had been too slow, too distracted. The tree's life was fragile, and he realized that despite his care, the magic he had awakened was beyond his control. As twilight fell, a group of villagers, led by Omari, entered the forest. Their faces were grim, their fear unmistakable. Some carried tools, axes and knives, and Eli's stomach dropped. He knew the tree would be defenseless against them. "You brought danger upon us all," Omari said, his voice shaking with anger and fear. "This tree is unnatural. It has to go. Leave it, or we will cut it down." Eli's chest tightened. "No," he shouted, stepping forward. "It's alive. You don't understand. It's not just a tree. It's something more." The villagers hesitated, but fear drove them onward. One of them swung an axe, aiming at the thick trunk. The bark quivered as though in protest, and Eli flung himself in front of it. "Stop, please," he cried, tears streaming down his face. The faces reacted violently. Some twisted in fear. Others cried, silver streaks glimmering along the bark. Eli's heart felt as though it might break. He realized then that the tree's very essence was connected to him. Every emotion, every thought, every moment of despair or hope. And in this moment, despair threatened to consume him. Suddenly, another face disappeared, its hollow stare replaced by emptiness. A sharp pang of loss stabbed Eli's chest. The small, delicate face had been one he had grown particularly attached to, a soul whose story had whispered directly into his heart. He sank to his knees, pressing his hands to the bark, trembling violently. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to." The villagers froze, uncertainty creeping into their fear. For a moment, the forest seemed to hold its breath. The wind whispered urgently through the branches, carrying fragmented voices and sorrowful cries from the faces that remained. Eli understood, then, that the magic was fragile, that the souls were slipping away because of neglect, fear, and misunderstanding. A surge of anger and determination flooded him. "No," he said, standing tall despite the trembling in his limbs. "I will not let you destroy this tree. I will protect it, no matter what." Omari stepped forward, scowling. "You are only a boy. You cannot control it. It is dangerous." Eli shook his head. "It's not dangerous. It's scared. It's hurting. And it needs me." The villagers hesitated, unsure how to respond. The forest itself seemed to respond to Eli's conviction. The leaves rustled, shimmering faintly, and the faces flickered with renewed light, some smiling faintly, some still fearful. Eli reached out, pressing his palm against the bark, and whispered each of the names he had learned, each fragment of story he had heard. He poured all of his empathy, all of his love, all of his grief into the tree, praying that it would hold, that the souls would remain, and that he could save them from being lost forever. The forest around them fell silent, as though listening. Eli's heart thudded painfully in his chest. He knew he could not save them all. Not yet, but he would not give up. Not when they had trusted him. Not when he had seen the first flickers of joy in their eyes, the glimpses of stories remembered, of grief soothed. As the villagers slowly backed away, uncertain and fearful, Eli sank to the ground beside the tree. The trembling faces, some still in distress, some now calm, watched him with what felt like gratitude. He pressed his forehead to the bark, tears slipping freely. "I will protect you. I promise. I won't let you be lost." In that moment, Eli realized the truth he had been avoiding. Protecting the tree meant more than guarding a magical object. It meant shouldering the weight of countless lives, the sorrow and hope of those who had come before, and the fragile connection between the past and the present. The burden was heavy, but it was his to carry. And as night fell, the faces continued to shimmer faintly, fragile but alive, reflecting the courage, grief, and determination of a boy who had discovered that love and responsibility often come wrapped in fear and loss, and that sometimes the greatest magic lies in the act of refusing to let go. The forest was silent, except for the faint rustle of leaves shimmering with a pale, otherworldly light. Eli knelt at the base of the tree, his fingers tracing the bark, feeling its pulse and the flickering faces that had endured so much. The events of the previous day haunted him. The fear in the villagers' eyes, the loss of the delicate faces, and the crushing weight of responsibility pressing on his shoulders. Yet within that sorrow, a quiet determination had begun to grow. He realized that saving the tree would require more than vigilance or physical protection. The souls within it were tied to emotion, memory, and the unspoken burdens of the past. If the tree was to thrive again, he would have to confront his own fears, acknowledge his grief, and release the doubts that had shadowed his heart for so long. He took a deep breath, feeling the cool earth beneath him, the heartbeat of the land beneath his knees, and whispered, "I'm ready." For hours, Eli sat in silence, closing his eyes and letting the memories come. Moments of loss, moments of shame, and the pain of feeling invisible in the village. The faces on the tree flickered in response, some wincing, some softening. The first breakthrough came when he allowed himself to cry openly, releasing the sorrow he had carried silently for so many years. His tears fell onto the roots and the soil, mingling with the pulse of the tree, and something shifted. The silver light in the bark brightened. The small, hollow spaces where faces had vanished began to shimmer faintly again, and delicate outlines of the lost souls flickered back into view. Eli gasped. It was working. His vulnerability, his willingness to face his own pain, had reignited the life of the tree. He sang then, softly at first, a lullaby his mother had hummed to him when he was small. The voices of the faces harmonized with his song, creating a gentle symphony of light and sound. Some faces smiled for the first time in years, their expressions soft and serene. Others blinked slowly, as if awakening from a long, restless sleep. The tree seemed to breathe, and with each exhale, Eli felt hope flow through him. Eli understood what he needed to do next. He ran back to the riverbank where he had first discovered the stone and dug carefully into the earth. He had found another small, smooth stone, similar to the first but slightly lighter in color. It pulsed faintly in his hand, as though it too were aware. Returning to the tree, he planted it carefully near the roots, whispering words of intent, of hope, and of release. The transformation was immediate. Light surged from the roots, spreading through the trunk and along each branch. The faces shifted, now calm, their expressions reflecting serenity rather than anguish. Eli watched, awestruck, as the tree seemed to stand taller, fuller, and more alive than ever before. Each face glimmered faintly, like lanterns glowing in the twilight, their silent gratitude pressing gently against his heart. When the villagers returned, their fear and suspicion were replaced by wonder. They had come to confront Eli once again, expecting chaos, but instead they found the forest alive in a way that was both beautiful and peaceful. The faces in the tree shimmered faintly, moving in patterns of joy and calm, reflecting the courage and empathy of the boy who had nurtured them. Omari, the elder, stepped forward slowly, his face a mixture of awe and humility. I did not understand, he admitted. It is alive in ways I cannot explain. Eli nodded quietly. It always was. I just had to listen, to care, and to face my own heart. From that day, the village began to see Eli not as a strange, isolated boy, but as a bridge between the natural and spiritual worlds. He tended the tree carefully, ensuring it remained healthy and vibrant, while also teaching the villagers to respect the delicate balance between life, memory, and emotion. The forest, once a place of whispers and shadows, became a place of reflection, of peace, and of remembrance. The faces no longer cried endlessly, nor did they flicker in fear. Instead, they shimmered with soft, warm light, occasionally speaking in quiet whispers of gratitude or fleeting laughter. Eli learned to communicate with them in subtle ways, through gentle touch, soft words, and shared presence. They were still connected to the past, still carrying fragments of sorrow and joy, but they were at peace, nurtured by Eli's courage, empathy, and love. In the quiet moments of evening, Eli would sit beneath the branches, listening to the faint murmurs of the tree, feeling the rhythm of life that pulsed beneath the forest floor. He realized that healing, whether for himself, for the faces, or for the village, required patience, courage, and a willingness to confront pain rather than hide from it. As weeks turned into months, Eli grew taller, stronger, more confident, yet still gentle and introspective. The villagers came to him with questions, with memories, with stories of their ancestors, and he guided them with care, helping them understand the delicate magic of life, loss, and love. He had transformed, not just the tree, but himself, and in doing so, he had transformed the forest, the village, and the lives connected to it. One evening, under the glow of the setting sun, Eli placed his hand on the tree's bark and whispered, "Thank you for trusting me, for letting me learn, for showing me that even the smallest acts can create extraordinary change." The faces flickered faintly, a silent chorus of agreement. Eli smiled, feeling a deep sense of peace and purpose. He knew that life would continue to bring challenges, loss, and sorrow, but he had learned the greatest truth, that love, memory, and empathy were powerful forces, capable of healing the deepest wounds, but only if one had the courage to face them head-on. Years passed, and the forest became a quiet sanctuary, its heart forever marked by the extraordinary tree Eli had nurtured. The once small sprout had grown into a magnificent tree, its branches stretching high, leaves shimmering with an ethereal glow, and faces embedded in the bark flickering occasionally with soft expressions, smiles of gratitude, moments of joy, whispers of long-forgotten memories. The villagers had grown accustomed to it, respecting it as a living monument of history, emotion, and connection. Eli had grown too. No longer the lonely, introspective boy, he had become a young man, confident yet still gentle, carrying the weight of responsibility with quiet strength. He was revered by the village not for magic or heroism, but for empathy, courage, and the understanding that life, memory, and emotion were intertwined in ways the human eye could not always see. Children now ran past the tree with wonder. Elders bowed respectfully to it, and families gathered nearby to reflect and remember. The faces in the tree appeared less frequently than they once had, but when they did, they told stories with elegance and subtlety. A grandmother's faint smile, a father's fleeting gaze, the soft laughter of a child long gone. They were reminders of love, loss, and the resilience of memory. Eli had learned to recognize them quickly, understanding that these appearances were not merely magical displays. They were connections to the living, the past, and the essence of humanity itself. One afternoon, as Eli wandered through the forest with the sun casting golden patterns across the ground, he stopped beside a face he recognized immediately, a face that had appeared when he was a boy, delicate and sorrowful. It flickered faintly, then shimmered brighter as Eli reached out. "You've grown," it seemed to whisper, though no words left the bark. Its eyes glimmered with approval, as though acknowledging the care, courage, and love he had poured into the tree over the years. Eli smiled softly, placing his hand over the bark. "We've grown together," he said quietly. The villagers continued to observe Eli's connection to the tree with quiet respect. Some still spoke in hushed tones, marveling at the way the young man could commune with what they had once feared. Others came to him seeking understanding, asking about the emotions and stories the tree held. Eli guided them patiently, teaching them that empathy and remembrance were acts of courage, and that caring for the past allowed the living to grow stronger. Eli's reputation as a guardian of memories spread beyond the village. Travelers who had heard whispers of the mystical tree arrived quietly, sometimes leaving small tokens or offerings, acknowledging the balance between the natural and spiritual worlds. Eli welcomed them, gently explaining that the tree was not merely a spectacle. It was a repository of history, emotion, and love, one that required respect, attention, and understanding. Even in quiet moments, Eli never stopped tending the tree. He had learned that nurturing the living, whether human or spirit, demanded consistency, patience, and heart. Every day, he placed his hands against the bark, listening to the faint murmurings of the faces, and offered reassurance, acknowledgement, and care. He sang softly when the wind blew too harshly, watered the roots when the soil grew dry, and whispered stories of the living so that the past would not feel abandoned. Over time, Eli noticed a new phenomenon. The faces began to flicker not only in response to his presence, but to the presence of others who approached the tree with love and respect. A mother standing beside her child, an elder reflecting on lost years, a traveler paying quiet homage. Each contributed to the tree's pulse. Eli understood, then, that the legacy of the tree was no longer his alone. The village, and even outsiders, had become part of its life, part of the cycle of memory, emotion, and connection that the tree embodied. One morning, as dawn spread pale light across the forest, Eli knelt beside the roots, uncovering a small, smooth stone similar to the one he had planted so many years ago. His fingers traced its cool surface, feeling the faint pulse within it. A smile curved his lips. He knew what he must do. With care and intention, he planted the new stone a short distance from the original tree. It pulsed softly, resonating with the energy of the first. Eli whispered to it, not knowing precisely what would happen, only that small acts could spark extraordinary growth, and that life, memory, love, and connection was cyclical. As he stepped back, the earth seemed to breathe. Tiny shoots emerged around the new stone, faintly luminous, hinting at the beginning of another miraculous cycle. Eli's heart swelled with hope. The tree would not merely survive. It would continue to evolve, grow, and connect generations yet to come. The villagers, who had gathered at a respectful distance, witnessed this subtle transformation. There was no fear, only reverence, as they saw the young man whose courage and empathy had safeguarded the spirits and memories of the past, ensuring that love and remembrance would endure. Omari, now older, stood silently, his eyes glistening with tears. "He has given us a gift beyond understanding," he murmured. As the sun rose fully, casting light across the branches and faces of the tree, Eli looked around at the village, the forest, and the life he had nurtured. He understood that the tree's legacy was not merely magical. It was moral, emotional, and deeply human. It was a reminder that small acts of care, courage, and love could ripple through time, touching lives in ways unseen but deeply felt. Eli knelt once more beside the tree, placing a hand on its trunk and closing his eyes. He could feel the faint shimmer of the faces, hear the whispers of gratitude, and sense the heartbeat of generations past and present. He understood that life, like the tree, was fragile and resilient, sorrowful and joyous, bound together by the threads of memory and connection. The young man rose slowly, gazing at the forest and village beyond. A faint breeze stirred, carrying the whisper of the tree's leaves, soft and luminous in the morning sun. Eli smiled quietly. He knew that life would continue to bring challenges, grief, and joy, but that the lessons of empathy, courage, and love would endure, carried forward in every leaf, every face, and every small act of care. And so, the tree stood, towering, mystical, and alive, a monument to memory, compassion, and the courage of a boy who had once planted a stone and grown a tree of faces. Its legacy would live on, shimmering faintly in the hearts of all who witnessed it, whispering the eternal truth that even the smallest acts of love could create extraordinary transformations. Eli turned to the new stone, a promise in his heart, and with steady hands he whispered, "May you grow as we have, carrying hope, memory, and love into the future." And as he left the forest, the branches of the original tree swayed gently, the faces flickering with soft, serene light, guardians of the past, witnesses to the present, and guides for the generations yet to come.